Hello, and welcome to 2020. The year, not the TV show. I had really wanted to do an episode on anti-vaxxers this month, largely because those guys really singe my tail fur. But I had a little trouble finding some material that hadn't already been ripped apart by Anti-Vaxxer and others. Gotta wonder if the recent massive measles outbreak both in the US and worldwide might have had something to do with it. I did, however, find a clip from what appears to be a news show where they interviewed a pro-vaxxer and an anti-vaxxer together on a related subject. So let's do a little compare and contrast, shall we?
Now, as the number of people receiving MMR vaccinations has dropped for the fourth year,
Well, it's nice to see the guy from Up is still able to find work.
Despite the number of cases trebling in 2018, Health Secretary Matt Hancock has said that he wouldn't rule out the option of banning children from school if they were unvaccinated.
But is it fair on children to miss out on an education if their parents don't want them to have the vaccine? Well, today...
I know it's rude to answer a question with a question, but do you think it's fair for immunocompromised children to miss out on being alive because someone else's parents are at best misinformed and at worst willfully ignorant and or don't care about anything other than their ideals, especially when homeschooling is an option?
We're joined by two mothers, Lottie Daly, who believes her child had a bad reaction to a vaccination, alongside Stephanie Nimmo, who was left completely deaf in her right ear after not being vaccinated against the measles. Welcome.
So we have someone who thinks her child was injured by being vaccinated, taking bets on her reasons boiling down to the correlation equals causation mistake, and someone who can prove that she herself was injured by not being vaccinated. Now, I'm not going to go into which side I think is right. The statistics speak for themselves, as long as you go by the real peer-reviewed statistics and not the debunked ones made up by shysters and fearmongers. Instead, we're going to look at how these two representatives present their cases. For example, which one looks like she's there to discuss a serious issue, and which one looks like a smug know-it-all.
To both of you. So the facts are there are 259 measles cases in England in 2017, rising to 966 in 2018. Uptakes of both jabs at the age of 5 has fallen in England for 4 years in a row, from 88.6% up to 87.2% in 2017 to 18. So
the number of cases has gone up as the number of vaccinations has gone down. The disturbing part of this is the sheer number of people who will say that this is a coincidence, then turn around and say that a child being diagnosed with autism shortly after being vaccinated isn't, despite the number of kids who were diagnosed with autism at about the same age who weren't vaccinated being nearly identical.
those are the figures that they speak for themselves. Lottie, you've got 3 children, and you say that actually this is against a child's human rights. If a parent decides that they're not going to vaccinate their child and the school refuses to educate that child, that's against their human rights.
I think that whilst those figures are correct, we're also not looking at the other side of the figures. There are studies that show from the government cases of measles deaths from 2003 until 2016 were only 10. In fact, in 2016, only 1 person, and that was under the age of 1, died of measles.
This, of course, has nothing at all to do with the fact that in addition to getting better at preventing the measles, 3 guesses how, starts with a V, rhymes with Maxine's, we've also gotten better at treating it on the increasingly less rare occasion it does pop up. It's also worth noting that the lady sitting next to you, you know, the one who's debilitated for the rest of her life, would not be part of any death rate statistic because she is very clearly not dead.
It is against the Nuremberg Code. It is against the UNICEF Human Rights Bill for Children to deny them an education and also to inject them or medicate them without their consent or without the parental consent. I don't think that that is an appropriate way to get the vaccine uptake up. I think that majority of mums, they start vaccinating. They only stop when something goes wrong.
And far more often than not, what goes wrong is that the parent in question goes online, finds somebody spouting the same sort of unfounded nonsense that you are, and unfortunately for their kids, actually believes it.
The Sunday Times showed that they did a Freedom of Information request that showed that actually, I think it was something like 49 children died of vaccine reactions. And that was the Sunday Times Freedom of Information request from the government. There were 2,100 yellow card vaccination reactions reported to the government from all the GPs.
For those of us who don't live in Great Britain, I took the liberty of looking up what this yellow card reaction she was talking about actually is. Thanks to Wikipedia, we can see here that a yellow card reaction event should be reported if the reaction results in a death or serious illness, the medicine causing the reaction is new or still under observation, regardless of how minor the reaction is, or the patient is a child, the usual recipient of vaccines, or a pregnant woman, again, regardless of how minor the reaction is. In other words, if I lived in Great Britain and 3-year-old Susie, adorable little thing, got a minor rash at the site of her vaccination injection that went away in an hour, that would still be reported as a yellow card reaction event. That becomes important later. In the interest of fairness, I did also look for the article that Snotty Lottie was referring to, but mysteriously I couldn't find it. I did, however, take the liberty of leaving you guys a couple of links in the description to a couple of groups who might be a little bit better informed on the subject than the Sunday Times, namely the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization.
One death of measles in the UK, one.
Setting aside the fact that one death from something we know how to prevent is one too many, you seem to be under the impression that something isn't a major health concern unless it's lethal. So the measles wasn't that major of an issue for the woman sitting next to you since she survived it. And amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease, the thing that jacked up the great Stephen Hawking, was no big deal because it took decades to kill him.
I think we're scaremongering, and
Geez, talk about the pot calling the kettle black. Or in this case, as Aaron Rosso deftly put it, more like the pot calling the silverware black.
think that if we want the uptake to be higher, then we need to help parents get these. We need to listen to mothers whose vaccine damages have happened.
But there's an
children.
example sitting on the sofa here that you weren't vaccinated and you are deaf in your right.
You'll find examples anywhere. People die from the flu.
Lottie,
Gee, why ever might that be?
I think the whole point is that we've almost been sanitised, that a generation ago that children were dying of measles. Children were...
Did that delusional twit just shake her head no to that?
in iron lungs with polio, and because of the vaccination programme we are not exposed to those deaths, we're not seeing them, and we're not also aware of not just the fact that children are dying of measles. That's an old statistic from 2016.
We haven't got anything up to date.
With vaccine.
How rude!
She let you finish spouting off what you had to say, even though I didn't, so the least you could do is return the favour to her. Since I know you won't, let's instead go to the scoreboard.
Vaccination rates actually decreasing. I think we are going to see the numbers of deaths increasing, but there's also the damage that these illnesses do and cause. So, for example, I was left deaf in my right ear. That's actually, you know, that's a difficult thing, but it's not life-threatening. But there are also children and young people who are unable to have the vaccine. They're immune suppressed, and therefore they are put at risk by unvaccinated children within. They absolutely.
No, they're not. The MMR sheds for up to 30 days.
Lottie, can I answer?
Added bonus. She goes into more detail on this claim in another interruption later, but I can go ahead and debunk it right now. You see, I did some research into what Lottie just said about shedding, and I found out from this article that the measles vaccine uses a live attenuated virus, which means that though it does still reproduce to trigger an immune reaction, it's been weakened to the point that it cannot actually cause an infection. Unfortunately, because of the fact that it still reproduces, it also shows up in specimen samples, or sheds, until the body figures out how to kill it. In other words, Lottie, your claim is a load of fertilizer. I'm trying to keep the show safe for work as much as I can. That's why I said fertilizer instead of shit.
Yes, my
children
youngest
are
daughter,
at
Daisy, was
risk.
born with a very rare genetic disease and she was unable to be vaccinated. And so she was therefore at risk of contracting measles, mumps, rubella and dying very painfully of those because she had a low, weakened immune system.
Yeah.
I'm contacted daily by friends whose children and people that I write about whose children had treatment for cancer, whose immune systems are wiped out and therefore cannot have a vaccination.
So Lottie, this isn't about the individual then, if what I'm understanding is right. This is about the community, actually. And there'll be people that'll be watching this that say if you don't vaccinate your child, then you are actually being selfish.
No, I think it's selfish to demand that children are vaccinated.
Right. Other people are being selfish when they want what's best for society as a whole instead of agreeing with what you want. Ah, this was so frustrating. In addition to what I already said about trying to keep the show safe for work, I can't call this woman a bitch because, as a female canine, I'd also be literally referring to myself.
When we do not know the efficacy and the safety long term, there's never been a trial that puts unvaccinated and vaccinated and health outcomes. There's never been there.
You know what, Lottie? I'm fed up with doing your research for you. Google it and see for yourself how wrong you are.
There was 2,100 deaths from routine vaccinations.
What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
Remember what I said about something becoming important later? Earlier in this video, you said...
I think it was something like 49 children died of vaccine reactions, and that there were 2,100 yellow card vaccination reactions reported.
Then we established that those aren't within 804.672 kilometers of being the same thing. That's 500 miles for my fellow Americans. Your inability to keep your story straight, combined with my inability to find your source, sort of raises the suspicion that you're kinda not being entirely truthful. Not that I would ever make such an accusation.
There was one from measles. Whilst I have every sympathy in the world for what you went through, you know I do, for every parent that loses a child. But
Why do I not believe you?
there is another side to this story, and there are children dying from vaccines.
The vaccination
How do you
programme has
answer
been
that?
running.
Anyone who thinks I'm not being fair about this, look at the scoreboard.
For
two-way
decades.
thing.
It has been running
And
for years, and we
children
have
are-
prevented. We have prevented these illnesses, and now we are seeing a resurgence of illnesses that were being.
Daddy, Big Boss, help me whether Jeffrey likes it or not. Woman, do you ever look at statistics outside of the made-up ones that support what you already believe?
We are, Lottie. We are seeing a resurgence of illnesses and preventable diseases that were essentially eradicated that are coming back.
So
And
should children, and this is the crux of what we were talking about, that the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, said he wouldn't rule anything out, that maybe if children were unvaccinated, that there could be an exclusion from school. Interestingly, and it might have been a bit of political grandstanding here, because the Department of Education said we ask schools to check what immunisations a child has had when they join the school, but our guidance clearly states that schools cannot refuse admission or exclude a pupil because they have not been immunised.
I think schools should be asking for, if a parent wants to send an unvaccinated child to school, I think the schools are within their rights to ask for a medical certificate that gives evidence as to why that child is not vaccinated.
But why?
Because we are protecting the whole community. For us
If you
to have
haven't got
herd
an illness,
immunity,
you cannot pass it
if
on.
we have herd to have herd immunity, 95% of the
hypothesis, it's not
population
confirmed.
needs to be vaccinated.
And
that
What about
immunity,
the
that
MMR
herd
shedding,
immunity
30
is going
days? What about those? How can my child, without any disease whatsoever, give a disease, yet an MMR vaccinated child with an attenuated live virus, which sheds for 30 days, is far more of a danger than my healthy, as far as I know, child?
And so when you
Told you she brought up that shedding thing again that we already debunked. Also, am I the only one who remembers that at the beginning of this, they said...
Lottie Daly, who believes her child had a bad reaction to a vaccination.
Yet not once does she say a word about her own kid being vaccine injured, which I think would have been her most compelling argument. In fact, she just got done saying that as far as she knows, her kids are completely healthy. Kind of raises that honesty question again, doesn't it? Now that this debacle pretending to be a discussion is over, let's take one last look at the scoreboard. Well, I guess we know who's better at polite discourse, don't we? After watching this, I really want to just give Stephanie a big hug. And I want Lottie to give me a big kiss. Just not on my face. Before I get out of here and vent some frustrations by pelting people with snowballs, I wanted to let you guys know that if you know of some video or online article that could seriously use a dose of sanity, or if you want to flatter me with a picture, in addition to leaving links in the comments, you can also email me or contact the creator of this channel on Discord. I'll leave links in the description. Heck, if you send a drawing of me and include the necessary information for me to credit you, I might feature it in a future video. I do have to state that YouTube guidelines will not allow me to feature any pictures that are, shall we say, not safe for work. But you can send them to me anyway, because I still want to see them. Anyhow, until next time, stay sane, everybody. Smoochies! If you like what I do, but want to see somebody do it way better, be sure to check out Sir Sick, the Social Inequality Crusader. Links in the description below. And tell him Susie sent you.